My name is Sera Calloway, and I was 34 the afternoon we buried my husband, and his mother told a room full of mourners that the house where I had lived for 6 years was coming back to the family. She said it at the reception, not quietly, not privately, not in the careful, lowered voice of a woman raising a difficult subject at a difficult time. She said it standing in my kitchen, in the house Marcus and I had bought together, with a glass of someone else's wine and the particular confidence of a woman who had decided that grief was the ideal moment to make an announcement because grief makes people too raw to argue back. She said Marcus would have wanted this place to stay in the family. She looked around my kitchen when she said it, not at me, at the cabinets, the counters, the window over the sink where Marcus used to stand with his coffee on Sunday mornings. She looked at my home, the way a person looks at a room they are already rearranging in their mind. 14 people heard her say it. I was one of them. I want to tell you what I said back. But first I need to tell you what Marcus had done 8 months before he died, and why. When his mother made that announcement in my kitchen on the worst day of my life, I was able to stand completely still and feel something that was not quite calm, but functioned as calm, because the alternative was not going to serve either of us. Welcome back to Quiet Justice Stories, where the quiet ones finally get heard and the truth always arrives with paperwork. If you have ever been expected to stay silent at the moment you had every right to speak, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and subscribe so the next one finds you. Marcus Calloway was the kind of man who fixed things before they broke. Not in the dramatic way, not in the way that announces itself. In the quiet, specific way of a man who had grown up in a house where things were allowed to deteriorate until they became crises and had decided early that he preferred to address problems while they were still small enough to be addressed without damage. He was a structural engineer. He spent his professional life calculating load-bearing capacity and stress tolerance and the precise point at which a material would fail under pressure. He thought about failure modes, the way other people thought about weather. When he was diagnosed 14 months before he died, a thing in his brain, located precisely, described carefully by a doctor whose careful language could not quite soften the weight of what she was saying. Marcus came home and sat at the kitchen table and was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I need to make a list." I said, "Okay." He said, "There are things that need to be in order, and I want to do them while I can still do them correctly." I said, "We have time." He looked at me with the expression of a structural engineer who has just received a load calculation he did not want to see. He said, "We have some time. Let's use it. I need to tell you about the house before I tell you about what Marcus put in order. We bought it in the 3rd year of our marriage. A Victorian on Clement Street, narrow and tall and slightly impractical in the way that Victorians are slightly impractical. The kind of house that requires ongoing attention and rewards it. We had stretched financially to buy it because Marcus said the bones were excellent and that bones were the only thing that mattered and everything else was cosmetics and time. He was right about the bones. We spent 4 years on the cosmetics and time. I stripped the kitchen cabinets myself over 2 weekends while Marcus rebuilt the back porch. We refinished the floors room by room, section by section, living around the work the way you live around the slow repair of something you love. We planted things in the small backyard that took 2 seasons to establish, and that Marcus watered with a consistency that embarrassed me because I kept forgetting. The house was $340,000 when we bought it. It was worth considerably more by the time Marcus sat at the kitchen table and made his list. We had built that value together. Every weekend, every repair, every decision about what to keep and what to change. The house was ours in the deepest sense of that word. It was also, because these things matter when the worst happens, ours on paper. Both names on the deed, both names on the mortgage. That was how we had bought it, and that was how it had always been, and I had not thought about it as protection, because I had not thought about needing protection. Marcus thought about it differently. Marcus thought about failure modes. His mother's name is Diane Calloway, and she is the kind of woman who has a clear internal hierarchy of what matters and where everything belongs, and who belongs where, and who has never. In the 20 years she has been Marcus's mother, and the 6 years she has been my mother-in-law, updated that hierarchy to include me at the level she considered appropriate for a Calloway. I was not a Calloway in her accounting. I was the woman Marcus had married. The distinction was subtle enough that I could never quite call it out directly, and sharp enough that I felt it every time we were in the same room. She was not cruel. I want to be precise about that. She was not the kind of mother-in-law who says cutting things at holiday dinners, or excludes you from family photographs, or makes the classic visible gestures of disapproval. She was the kind who simply maintained, consistently and without drama, a set of assumptions about how things worked that did not include you as a full participant. Marcus's life before me was the life she understood. My presence in it was a variable she had learned to accommodate without fully integrating. When Marcus got sick, Diane integrated fast. She was at the house within 3 days of the diagnosis. She stayed for 2 weeks. She reorganized my kitchen. I mention the kitchen because it is the kind of detail that sounds small and is not small. She moved things to where she felt they should be. And when I moved them back, she moved them again. And when I said something to Marcus about it, he said she needed to feel useful. And I said, I understood. And I moved the things back, and she moved them again, and we reached a détente that was not quite peace, but was livable. She came every month after that. Sometimes for a weekend, sometimes for longer. And every time she came, she brought the same quality she had always carried. The quiet, consistent assumption that the Calloway family was a structure with known load-bearing walls, and that I was adjacent to that structure rather than inside it. Marcus saw it. He saw it clearly and specifically, and I know this because of the list he made at the kitchen table on the day he came home from the doctor. I am a property law paralegal. I have been for 8 years. I spend my professional life in the specific intersection of property rights and family law, the contested spaces where ownership and relationship overlap, and where the question of who has the legal right to something becomes separate from the question of who feels they should have it. I have sat across from hundreds of people in those contested spaces. I've helped them understand what the documents say versus what they believe. I've seen what happens when someone dies without the right paperwork, and I've seen what happens when someone dies with it. And the difference between those two outcomes is often the difference between a family that grieves together and a family that litigates instead. Marcus knew what I did for a living. He had listened to me talk about work for 6 years. He understood, with the precision of a man who calculated structural loads, exactly what happened when a person died without adequate documentation, and exactly what could be prevented with adequate documentation. And he sat at the kitchen table with his list, and he did what structural engineers do. He addressed the failure modes while they were still small enough to address. 8 months before he died, Marcus asked me to sit with him at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. He had his laptop open and a notepad beside it and a cup of coffee he kept forgetting to drink. He said he wanted to go through some things with me. I sat down. He said the house first. He pulled up the county recorder's website and showed me the current deed and said he wanted to file an amendment, a survivorship deed specifically, that would ensure the property transferred to me automatically at his death, without going through probate and without requiring anyone's approval or signature or agreement. I said the house is already in both our names. He said joint tenancy with right of survivorship needs to be explicit in the deed language in our state, and our current deed said tenants in common, which meant his share could pass through his estate and be subject to a will contest or a family claim. I looked at him. He said, I need to know this is yours. Not in question, not subject to challenge. Yours the moment I am gone. I said, Marcus. He said, "I know what my mother thinks about this house. I have known my whole life how she thinks about things that belong to Calloway's. I need this to be bulletproof before I can stop thinking about it." I said, "Okay." He filed the amended deed the following Thursday. I drove him to the county recorder's office. He stood at the counter with his engineering precision and made sure every line was correct before he signed. The clerk stamped it. It was recorded that afternoon. He came home and put the receipt in the fireproof box we kept in the closet with the other important documents, and he crossed something off his list. Then he forgot about it the way you forget about a load-bearing wall. Once you have confirmed it can hold the weight. I forgot about it too. For 8 months, I forgot about it, because there was so much else to hold, and the house was stable, and Marcus was still there, and the deed was in the box, and we had other things to think about. I did not think about the box again until the afternoon we buried him, and his mother stood in my kitchen and told 14 people that the house was coming back to the family. The funeral was on a Thursday in November. The cemetery was the one Marcus had chosen himself from a list he had made in month 3 of the diagnosis, practical and specific, a man who preferred to make decisions while he was capable of making them clearly. It was cold, the kind of cold that sits in your coat and does not leave. I stood at the grave with his sister Bree on one side and his college roommate Daniel on the other, and I felt the cold and the specific, impossible weight of a day you have been preparing for, and that is still entirely beyond preparation. Diane stood across from me. She was composed in the way she was always composed, straight-backed, dry-eyed, performing her grief with the dignity of a woman who believed that public emotion was a private failure. She had not spoken to me directly since the hospital. I had not taken it personally. Grief makes people go to the people they knew before. I was the person Marcus knew after. The reception was at the house because Marcus had wanted it there. His exact words in the conversation we'd had in month 8 had been, "I want people to be somewhere warm and comfortable, and the house is the warmest, most comfortable place I know." So people came to the house, 40 of them. Friends and colleagues and neighbors and family members I had met at holidays, and some I was meeting for the first time, and all of them moving through the rooms that Marcus and I had built together, carrying plates of food that other people had brought, talking in the low, careful way people talk in houses after funerals. I moved through the rooms, doing the things a host does, because doing them kept my hands occupied, and my hands needed occupying. Diane was in the kitchen when I came through with an empty tray. She had gathered around her a specific constellation of people: her sister, 2 of Marcus's cousins, a family friend I had met twice, and she was speaking with the quiet authority of a woman at the center of her own story. I heard the end of what she was saying as I came through the door. She said this house should come back to the family now. Marcus would have wanted that. We will need to discuss the arrangements. The room went slightly quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something has been said that everyone heard and no one is sure how to respond to. 14 people, including me. Diane looked at me when I came through the door. She did not look away. She held my eyes with the steady composure of a woman who had decided this was the right moment and was not going to be deterred by my presence in my own kitchen. She said, "Sera, we should talk soon about the house. I know this is a hard day, but there are things that need to be settled." I held the empty tray. I looked at my mother-in-law standing in the kitchen Marcus and I had refinished together, and I felt the full cold weight of what she had just done and what she believed and what she expected me to do in response. She expected me to be too raw to argue. She was right that I was raw. She was wrong about what that meant. I said, "Yes, Diane, we should talk." And I went back to being the host, because that was what the day required, and because the conversation she wanted was not a conversation I was going to have in front of 14 people on the worst day of my life. I was going to have it later, with the right documents on the table in front of the right witnesses, If you have ever been expected to absorb something unbearable in public because the person delivering it knew you were too broken to push back, stay with me. Subscribe so this story reaches you all the way to the end. Because what Marcus left in that fireproof box is the reason I can tell you this calmly now. The house emptied by 7 that evening. Bree was the last to leave. She stood at the front door with her coat and her keys, and she looked at me with the specific expression of a woman who had heard what her mother said in the kitchen and had not known what to do about it. She said, "Sera, I'm sorry." I said, "I know." She said she doesn't mean it the way it sounds. I said, "I think she means it exactly the way it sounds." Bree looked at her shoes. She said, "My mother loves this house." I said, "I know that too." She said, "I don't think she's wrong that Marcus would have wanted it to stay in the family." I said, "I think Marcus was very specific about what he wanted." Bree looked at me. I said good night, and I closed the door gently, and I stood in the hallway of my empty house, and I listened to her car pull away. Then I went to the closet. I took out the fireproof box. I sat at the kitchen table where Marcus had made his list, and I opened the box and I found the deed, the amended deed. Recorded 8 months before, stamped by the county clerk, explicit and complete in the specific legal language of a state that requires survivorship to be named rather than assumed. I read every word. I read my name. I read the date. I read the recording number. Then I put it back in the box. I made tea. I sat in the kitchen that smelled like the food people had brought, and the coats of 40 visitors, and underneath all of it, faintly, Marcus's coffee from Sunday mornings. And I let myself feel the full weight of the day. Not the anger, not the clarity that was coming, just the loss. Because the loss was real, and it was enormous, and it deserved its own space before anything else. I sat in the kitchen until midnight. Then I went to bed. The conversation with Diane could wait one more day. The deed was not going anywhere. She called the next morning at 9. Her voice was the composed version, warm but purposeful, the register she used when she had an agenda she considered reasonable. She said she wanted to come by the following Saturday to sit down together about the house and about what came next. She said she had spoken with her attorney. She said there were some questions about Marcus's estate that needed to be addressed, and she wanted to handle them within the family if possible. I said I would be available Saturday. I said I would have some documents ready. She said that was fine. She said she hoped we could be reasonable with each other. I said I intended to be entirely reasonable. I called my colleague the moment I hung up. Her name is Grace Oduya, and she is a property attorney who had handled more survivorship deed cases than almost anyone I knew, and who had agreed, without me having to ask twice, to be present on Saturday. I also called Daniel, Marcus's college roommate, the man who had stood beside me at the grave. He had been Marcus's closest friend for 15 years, and he had been in the kitchen when Diane made her announcement, and he had heard every word, and he had called me twice since then to check in, and I knew without asking that he would come on Saturday if I needed him there. I needed him there, not as a legal witness, as a person who had known Marcus, as a person who could, if it became necessary, speak to what Marcus had wanted, and what Marcus had said, and what Marcus had been the kind of man to do. I texted him. I said, "Can you come Saturday morning?" He said, already planning on it. I spent the days between the funeral and Saturday doing the things that follow a death, the notifications, the accounts, the small administrative machinery of a life that has ended and needs to be officially recorded as ended. I did them with the particular focus that grief sometimes produces, the narrow tunnel of task and completion that keeps the larger thing at a manageable distance. I also pulled every document, the amended deed, recorded and stamped, the mortgage statement showing both names, the title insurance policy, the county assessor's record showing current value, $580,000, a figure that would have delighted Marcus, who had been right about the bones. I put them in a folder. I put the folder on the kitchen table, and I waited for Saturday the way you wait for something you are prepared for. Not without dread, but without the specific fear that comes from not knowing what you are walking into. I knew exactly what I was walking into. I had the documents. Diane arrived at 10 with her sister Margaret and a man I did not recognize who introduced himself as her attorney, a name I did not catch and did not need to. A man in his 50s with a leather portfolio and the practiced ease of someone who believed he was about to conduct a straightforward conversation. Grace was already at the table when they arrived. Daniel was in the living room with a cup of coffee. Diane looked at Grace with a question. I introduced Grace as my colleague in property law. Diane's attorney looked at Grace with the specific recalibration of a man who had come expecting one kind of meeting and was now in a different one. We sat down. Diane folded her hands on the table. She said she wanted to begin by saying that she understood this was a painful time and that she was not trying to make it harder. She said Marcus had grown up in a family that had certain values about property and legacy, and she knew he would have wanted those values honored. She said the house on Clement Street had always felt like a Callaway house to her, and she believed Marcus would have agreed. She said she had spoken with her attorney about the estate and about her options, and she wanted to discuss a reasonable path forward that honored everyone. Her attorney opened his portfolio. He said that as the surviving spouse I had certain rights, but that the estate's disposition was a matter that required full consideration of all parties, including the family, and that there might be aspects of the property's history and the family's relationship to it that were relevant to how things should be settled. He said relevant in the careful way attorneys say things they have not yet fully committed to. I let them finish. I looked at Diane when they were done. She was watching me with the same steady composure she had brought to the funeral, the expression of a woman who believed she was in the right, and that being in the right was sufficient. I said, Diane, I want to show you something. I opened the folder. I placed the amended deed on the table. Face up. The county stamp visible. The recording number visible. Both our names visible. Marcus William Callaway and Sera Jane Callaway, and beneath them the specific language Marcus had driven to the county recorder's office to file 8 months before he died. Joint tenants with right of survivorship. I said Marcus filed this deed amendment 8 months before he died. I said it converts our joint tenancy to explicit right of survivorship, which means the property transferred to me automatically at the moment of his death. I said it does not pass through the estate. I said it is not subject to a will or a family claim or a negotiation. I said it was recorded at the county, and the recording is public, and any attorney can pull it from the county database in approximately 4 minutes. I set the recording receipt beside the deed. I set the current title record beside the receipt. I said the house on Clement Street is mine. It has been mine since the moment Marcus died. He made sure of that 8 months ago. Diane looked at the deed. Her attorney looked at the deed. He reached across the table and picked it up and read it. His portfolio closed slowly. I watched his face do the specific thing that faces do when a document is cleaner than anticipated. He set it back down. He said to Diane quietly, "This is a valid survivorship deed." Diane did not look at him. She was looking at the deed. She was looking at Marcus's signature at the bottom of the page, his handwriting, the careful, specific signature of a man who had come to the county recorder's office with his list and his engineering precision and made sure every line was correct before he signed. She looked at his signature for a long time. When she looked up, her face had done something I had not seen it do in 6 years of knowing her. The composure had not fallen. It had shifted. Underneath it was something that was not quite what I expected. It was grief, real grief, not for the house, for her son, for the fact that his handwriting was on a document on this table, and he was not in this room, and the house still smelled faintly of his coffee on Sunday mornings, and nothing about any of that was going to change regardless of what any deed said. I saw it happen, and for one moment we were not adversaries across a kitchen table. We were two women who had loved the same person and lost him. I let that moment exist. I did not rush past it. Then Diane said something I had not expected. She said he did this on purpose. It was not a question. I said yes. She said he knew what I was going to do. I said I think he knew what you might do. She said he never said anything to me. I said no. She was quiet for a long time. Her sister, Margaret, was looking at the table. Her attorney had closed his portfolio entirely and was sitting back in his chair with the stillness of a professional who has understood that his role in this meeting is concluded. Then Diane said, and I want to give you these words exactly because they are the most honest thing she said in 6 years of knowing me. She said he always did think ahead. I said yes, he did. She said it was the thing she loved most about him. I said me too. She did not contest the deed. I want to be honest about what followed because I think the truth of it matters more than the clean version. She did not contest the deed, and she did not apologize for what she said at the reception, and she did not become a different person in the weeks that followed. She remained who she was. But something had shifted, not in her understanding of the house. That was settled, and she understood it was settled, in her understanding of Marcos, of what he had thought and planned and prepared for, of the specific, quiet way he had loved me, not with grand gestures, but with amended deeds and fireproof boxes and lists made at kitchen tables. She called me 6 weeks after that Saturday. She said she wanted to come by the house, not to negotiate, just to come by. I said yes. She came on a Sunday afternoon, and we sat in the kitchen, and she looked at the window over the sink where Marcus used to stand with his coffee, and she told me things about him I had not known, things from before me, from his childhood, from the years I had not been there for. I listened, I told her things she had not known, things from after, from the 6 years that had been mine with him. We did not become close. I do not want to give you a tidy ending that is not true, but we became something neither of us had been before, honest with each other, in the specific, careful way of two people who have stopped performing and started simply being in the same room. That was not nothing. That was, I think, what Marcus would have called addressing the failure mode while it was still small enough to address. I still live on Clement Street. The bones are excellent. Marcus was right about the bones. He was right about the deed. He was right in the specific, quiet way. He was right about most things, to make his list and work through it while he still could. His handwriting is on a document in the county recorder's office that will outlast everything that was said at the reception. That is what he left me, not just the house, the proof that he had thought about this, that he had sat at the kitchen table with his engineering precision and calculated the failure mode and addressed it 8 months before it arrived, that he had known what mattered and had put it in writing. I think about the list he made that Sunday afternoon. I think about the way he crossed things off it. I think about him standing at the county recorder's counter making sure every line was correct before he signed. He could not stop what was coming. He made sure that what came after it was solid. That is the whole of who he was. And no announcement at a reception, and no conversation with an attorney, and no amount of family history and Callaway tradition could touch what he had put in writing before he lost the ability to write it. The house is mine. It has always been mine since the moment he died. He made sure of that. I water the plants he planted in the backyard with a consistency that would have satisfied him. I stand at the window on Sunday mornings with my coffee. I keep the bones excellent. That is my story. One announcement at a reception on the worst day of my life. One deed filed 8 months earlier by a man who thought ahead And one Saturday morning, when the document said everything that needed saying, so I did not have to raise my voice to say it. If someone in your life loves you enough to prepare for the worst before it arrives, tell them you see it. Do not wait. And if you are the person who keeps the important documents in a fireproof box, keep them there. Keep the box somewhere you can find it on the day you need it most. The documents your people file before they are gone are the last conversation they have with the world on your behalf. Make sure someone is listening. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment and tell me which part of this story stayed with you. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.